This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Heather Sells. President Donald Trump and his opponent Joe Biden spent the last hours before the election bringing home their message. The president is hitting 5 states today on top of large rallies across 5 states on Sunday. Former Vice President Biden is focused on Pennsylvania. CBN chief political analyst David Brody spoke with CBN founder Dr. Pat Robertson on Monday's 700 Club about the key battleground state.
David, all eyes are on Pennsylvania, and it looks like when Biden talked about shutting down fossil fuels, he opened the door for Trump. What do you think?
You're absolutely right, Pat. As a matter of fact, those poll numbers in Pennsylvania started to plummet. 6 points, 5 points, now about 4 or 3 points in Pennsylvania in terms of a Biden lead, at least according to the polls. But even if you give Biden a 3 or 4 point lead, the last time I checked, that's in the margin of error. And here comes Trump Nation, Make America Great Again Nation, MAGA, as we've heard all about. And as you said at the top of the show, that is what the Trump campaign is relying on, that MAGA Nation will show up on Tuesday.
At least 95 million people have already voted in the 2020 general election. That includes 60 million returned mail-in ballots and over 34 million in-person votes. The University of Florida Elections Project is tracking these numbers, and Professor Michael McDonald joins us now with the latest. Dr. McDonald, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.
Well, tell us, how does this early voting compare with 2016, and what do you think it means for the turnout tomorrow?
Well, it's off the charts. We're over twice the number of people who voted early than in 2016. We already expected that because there are going to be so many mail ballots that were going to be sent to voters. But what we didn't expect was the large number of people who are also voting in person early. Taking together, we're probably looking over 100 million people will have already cast ballots by tomorrow. Then the question is, how many more will do it on Election Day? How many more mail ballots will come in later? And looking at that and making some educated guesses, I'm thinking that we're going to have about 160 million people vote in the election. That'd be a turnout rate of 67%, a turnout rate that we haven't seen since 1900.
Oh, that's phenomenal. What was the turnout rate 4 years ago?
It was just a little over 60%. So we're looking at a significant increase in turnout from 2016.
Okay. Well, the big question, of course, is how these early voters voted. What do we know about their party affiliation, their demographics?
Yeah, of course, we don't know how they voted yet.
Right.
The ballots still need to be counted, and that process will start tomorrow on Election Day in many states. So we have to wait for the votes. What we do know from the partisan composition of the electorate, it's a complicated story. I think overall, one thing that we can definitely see is more unaffiliateds that are voting compared to partisans. That's very clear in the data. In some states, we're seeing a slight shift of more Democrats voting, but that's not uniform across the state. And certainly there's some very critical battleground states where things look just about where they were in 2016. So it's going to come down to that Election Day vote. And the question is, how much of it's there? How much of it's going to be supportive of Trump?
Right. So fascinating. A lot of people are wondering when we will have the election results. One piece of that puzzle, of course, is the 31 million outstanding mail ballots that election officials have not entered as returned. How might those affect when we get the results?
Well, it really depends upon the state. There are some states, like my home state of Florida, where those ballots have to be back to election offices by election day. Election officials have already processed lots of the ballots that were returned earlier. So around 8:30 or so in Florida, about 30 minutes after the polls close, we should get a lot of mail ballots and in-person early votes. Now, that early vote is looking very good for Biden. So when we get those first numbers in, just take a big, deep breath, because that does not mean that Biden has won. We're going to have to see that Election Day vote. That could shift it back towards Trump. And then there's going to be election officials processing all the mail ballots that came in on Election Day itself, and that might come in even a little bit later. So it could be a really seesaw roller coaster ride on election night in Florida, and that process is probably going to play out in lots of other states as well.
Okay, so it sounds like we're dealing with all these different pieces of the voting pie, if you will. We're dealing with the tallying up the early voting and then the actual day of voting, and then it could be continued on if it's a really close election. Sounds like perhaps days, or what do you think we're looking at?
Well, there are some states that are fast counting states, and we may get a good read on what's going to happen with the Electoral College from those states. So we may know something about what's happened and who the next president-elect will be with those fast counting states like Florida, if it's decisive enough. We could still be in recounts, so never look beyond that for Florida. But looking at some of the other states, if it comes down to some other states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, we know that election officials can't start processing those ballots until tomorrow, or in the case of Michigan, they can start today, and it's going to take them a while to process all the mail ballots that they have. Election officials there are saying it could take 3 to 4 days for them to process them all, and we wouldn't get the election results from those states until maybe Friday of this week.
Okay, well, that's good information to know. And I just have to ask, as a political scientist, someone who's been following voting patterns for years, is this kind of a huge highlight this year with all these people voting for you? What's the buzz in your community like?
Well, I mean, I'm always pleased when people vote, because our democracy depends upon the will of the people, and that will is expressed through voting. And, whether or not you're a Democrat or Republican, it's really important for a country to function properly for people to participate. So, my community, yeah, it's great, but what's really great is it's a great story for the nation that we've had what appears to be record turnout, and we managed to do this in the midst of the pandemic. There was a lot of concern about whether or not we'd be able to run an election. We are going to hold an election. It is happening. It's already happening, and it will finish up tomorrow with the voting, and then we'll have the counting.
All right. Well, Dr. Michael McDonald, we appreciate your work and your insights right now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, both candidates this year have made strong appeals to people of faith. Dr. Ed Stetzer is the executive director of the Wheaton College Billy Graham Center, and he joins us now with more on evangelicals and the election. Dr. Stetzer, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Heather.
So interesting this year, because in 2016, we saw Hillary Clinton really not making an effort to reach out to people of faith. And this year, of course, we are really seeing both candidates do that. How are their messages playing with people of faith from your perspective?
Well, it's a significant shift. Hillary Clinton seemed to work hard to alienate evangelicals and rather try to engage them, where the Biden campaign, Josh Dixon is their faith leader advisor, has really tried to engage evangelicals. I do think it's not been without challenge, particularly white evangelicals have a very strong affinity with this president, but they have engaged. And I think we actually did a series, had different advisors from different campaigns to speak into kind of why they made the case for their candidate. And people are listening, but at the same time, I think people are pretty strongly set. Most people of faith are pretty strongly set already.
Okay, so you don't think there's much wiggle room, even though the Biden campaign has repeatedly used language like soul of the nation, and Joe Biden is a person of faith. You don't think that perhaps those kind of appeals or the president's appeals are swaying many evangelicals?
Well, I would say, and probably not at this point, I think most people who are very supportive of the president are very supportive of the president because of issues of pro-life issues or the Supreme Court or religious liberty. And I would say that people who are voting for the vice president, and particularly disproportionately people of faith who are people of color, are doing so because of the language the president uses, or they're concerned about immigration or refugees or systemic racism, whatever else it may be. In other words, I think most of those people have probably decided already. There may be some, and if the Biden campaign can move some of those evangelicals away from Trump, either to not voting for Trump or voting specifically for Biden, significant shift could be made with just a small shift in the number of evangelicals. So again, most have already made up their mind, but they're going for those people who are just unsure about for whom they're going to pull that lever.
Right, and you've already somewhat alluded to this, but what do you see as some of the driving issues for evangelicals in this election, given that they're not a monolithic group, but what do you see as really core to their vote?
Yeah, so I would say for white evangelicals, it is economic issues. White evangelicals are overwhelmingly Republican, and they actually vote more like traditional Republicans. So it might be economic issues or foreign policy. And then you get other issues like the Supreme Court certainly plays into that as well. Concerns about religious liberty, issues about the concern about the unborn. That tends to be more of a driving issue for white evangelicals, not all. And then when you broaden that, a third of evangelicals, when you look at evangelicals by belief using the National Association of Evangelicals Lifeway Research Protocol, about a third of evangelicals by belief are actually people of color. And they are concerned about pro-life issues and religious liberty. And they're simultaneously and sometimes even more concerned about issues that might be more local issues related to school funding, might be issues of racial injustice. How might we address some of the systemic inequities that are at work as well? So I think, voting is a complex thing. I hope that all biblical Christians care about some of the issues that I've listed, how we speak of immigrants and refugees, how we care about systemic injustice, the unborn. I hope we should all care about those. Then someone goes into that voting booth and they, hopefully with those biblical values, have to make the determination what's the best use of their vote to accomplish the kind of world that we desire it to be.
Right. Well, it is such a difficult vote this year, I think, for a lot of people. I want to ask you about religious liberty because that seems to have bubbled up again in the last couple of days. And it always, of course, is a concern for people of faith, but some say that it's self-centered to consider protecting that right now. How do you view it in terms of what kind of a priority it should be for believers as they go to the polls?
Well, one of the things that bothers me, I think, is that some people are driven by fear. And I don't think that God is honored if our vote is driven by fear. In addition to that, though, I would say that I have significant concerns about religious liberty, right? Candidate Joe Biden, Vice President Biden, has recently just re-announced his support for the Equality Act, which the Coalition for Christian Colleges and Universities considers an existential threat, a threat to the existence of the ability of places like Wheaton College, where I serve, and other Christian schools to accomplish their mission. So what I would say is I think a fear-driven voting strategy is ultimately what both campaigns are working for. Just watch the ads. It's driven by fear. But God has not given us a spirit of fear. We do need to make the best choice in the situation that we have with, might I say, some deeply flawed candidates and at the same time, values that don't fit perfectly into either political party. And so how do we respond to that? I think we pray, we seek the Lord's guidance, and we recognize that other Christians may have come to different conclusions. We're still in the body of Christ with them when we move forward together on mission after this election.
We have a lot of people wondering how this whole week is going to play out, of course. What is your hope for the church this week and what kind of voice it will be?
Well, I hope we'll remember that Jesus is not coming back riding a donkey or an elephant. He's the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. And people often vote differently, even based on their ethnic or racial background. People vote different as they sort of determine how biblical values should be lived out. And what I would say is I hope we'll have grace towards people who maybe disagreed. I hope ultimately that our greater allegiance is to Jesus, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. There's a lot of division in the country, but I'm deeply grieved by the fact there's so much division in the church. This politics makes a terrible idol, and it makes a terrible religion. And I think we ultimately need to get back to the fact that our greatest priority and our greatest loyalty is to Jesus, God's glory, and God's mission. And we need to unite the church, build these bridges, get back on mission, show and share the love of Jesus to a broken and hurting world. The world needs Jesus. We see it so clearly right now. Let's get through this election. Let's vote what we believe is the right choice for us. And then let's make the primary focus of our lives the good news of the gospel being shared by our words and in our deeds.
All right. Those are good words. Dr. Ed Stetzer, Wheaton College, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Heather.
Coming up, an American missionary is now safe after being abducted by extremists. The incredible story of how he made it home.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep. This election night, with a country divided and America's future hanging in the balance, go to a place you can trust. CBN News. CBN News presents an election night special with live coverage starting at 7 p.m. Get live updates on each of the campaigns, plus analysis on the shifting balance of power. Watch November 3rd at 7 p.m. on the CBN News Channel or download the CBN News app. CBN News, because truth matters.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
U.S. Special Forces have rescued an American missionary in Nigeria after he was abducted by 6 gunmen. Vice President Mike Pence praised the military operation during a campaign rally in North Carolina this weekend.
Last night, in a daring raid, U.S. Special Forces rescued an American hostage in Nigeria. That American is safe and no military personnel were injured. The armed forces of the United States are the greatest force for good in the history of the world, and we're going to continue to make the strongest military in the world stronger still for 4 more years.
Missionary Philip Walton had been living in Niger near the border with Nigeria, raising cattle and farming with his family. Walton's father told the Daily Mail that assailants entered Walton's home demanding money and then tied up his wife, young daughter, and his brother before taking him into captivity. In a tweet, President Trump commended the soldiers for the rescue, saying, "Our nation salutes the courageous soldiers behind the daring nighttime rescue operation and celebrates the safe return of yet another American citizen." Well, meanwhile, extremists in Nigeria have released a video of another pastor being held captive. According to International Christian Concern, Reverend Polycarp Zongo of the Church of Christ was kidnapped by members of the Islamic State West Africa province. In the video, Reverend Zongo calls on government officials to assist in his release. He said he was traveling for a church conference when armed men abducted him. 2 unknown Christian women were also taken with him. Well, in Afghanistan, an attack on the country's largest university leaves at least 19 people dead and 22 wounded. The Afghan Foreign Ministry said that 3 suspects opened fire on Kabul University's campus today and were killed after an hours-long standoff with Afghan troops. No group immediately took responsibility for the attack, and the Taliban issued a statement saying it was not involved. Coming up, more unrest in Philadelphia and a church caught in the middle of it, destroyed beyond repair.
On October 1st, 1961, history was made when a tiny station began transmitting the first signals of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
And now, a new era has begun with the all-new CBN News Channel.
Just moments ago, the Iron Dome intercepted an incoming rocket right on the Gaza border.
Administering in this area, spiritual warfare is definitely involved.
A 24/7 news network, bringing you the news you want from a source you can trust.
In Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals.
Let's talk about the economy.
Believers here are joining together to win people to Jesus Christ.
All your favorite shows now in one place. Go to CBNNewsChannel.com to find out how to get the CBN News Channel on your TV all day, every day. CBN News. Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
A Philadelphia church set on fire in the midst of more unrest there. An interesting observation about cancel culture and celebrity endorsements on the campaign trail. These are some of the latest FaithWire headlines, and Trey Goins-Phillips is here now with the details on some of these hot stories. Trey, first of all, tell us, though, what happened to this church in Philadelphia and how is the church responding?
Hi, Heather. Yeah, so there's this, it's a Vietnamese church called Vietnam Baptist Church in Philadelphia. And rioters, when all the unrest broke out last week yet again, with a lot of Black Lives Matter protests, Antifa riots throughout the city, attacked a church seemingly without any reason. Even the pastor said he doesn't understand why they would have attacked the church. But nevertheless, they absolutely destroyed the sanctuary. It was set on fire and burned to the ground. But there was a miraculous thing that the pastor observed happening. He said that there were 3 hard drives that he was most concerned about because they housed documents, important documents, immigration papers, tax filings, marriage certificates from local community couples and families that the church had ministered to and had helped file immigration work for or officiate weddings or help them with tax filings. And as a matter of fact, those 3 hard drives remained the only things that were unburned in the sanctuary, and he was able to rescue those. So that's a beautiful moment that the pastor is highlighting, as saying our building is gone, but God preserved what we needed to be saved, and no congregants were hurt either.
Oh, wow. Well, that is just incredibly tragic, but incredible that the pastor would even be able to praise the Lord in the middle of a time like that. I also want to ask you, you have reported a lot on cancel culture, and you have one story right now of some surprising criticism for it. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was actually surprised to have seen this, but comedian Sarah Silverman, who's generally far progressive or far to the left politically, she came out and she condemned cancel culture, and she actually condemned it in a way that I think Christians can understand and we as believers can appreciate. Is she said that there's no redemption in cancel culture. That's the main crux of the issue, is that there is no redemptive grace associated with cancel culture. Now, she's not a Christian, but I think she capitalized on something that is a real issue, that there is no room for grace. There is no room for restoration in cancel culture. When we decide that someone did something 10, 15 years ago, and we decide to ostracize them or shun them from popular society, we remove the opportunity for someone to grow out of a mistake or to grow out of something that they did that they shouldn't have done. So I was glad to see someone like Sarah Silverman condemn it. And it was actually something that they talked about on ABC's The View last week. And unfortunately, there was one co-host, Sunny Hostin, who actually disagreed with Sarah Silverman and said that we needed to have cancel culture. And she said it should be actually rebranded as consequence culture. But thankfully, the rest of the panel agreed with Silverman that we need to get rid of cancel culture because it's more harmful than good for our society. So I was happy to see that there were several voices who are traditionally progressive come out and say we need to get rid of cancel culture because there is no redemption in it.
What a great observation about redemption and cancel culture. Okay, and tell us also, apparently there's been some last-minute celebrity endorsements on the presidential campaign trail. What's going on?
Yeah, there have been some really big, kind of surprising endorsements. Brett Favre has come out and endorsed the president. Lil Wayne, a rapper, has come out and endorsed the president's efforts with the Black community. Ice Cube, another rapper and actor, has said that he's been working with the Trump administration on its Platinum Plan, which, as CBN has reported, is the president's outreach to invest about $500 billion into $500 million into the Black community. Also Jack Nicklaus, who's a legendary golfer, has come out and supported the president. So there have been a lot of big name last minute endorsements that are not typical of a Republican president that I'm thinking may impact how Election Day plays out tomorrow.
Okay. And just briefly, Trey, Pastor John Piper has come out to comment on a recent report on him and his support or not for the president. Tell us about that.
So he penned a blog post over at desiringgod.org, his website, and basically laid out why he won't be voting for either candidate. But then he was actually associated with this ad that ended up in the Washington Post, and he said, my name should not have been on this. I didn't sign on to this. I simply said I'm not voting for either candidate, not that I'm standing against a candidate.
All right. Well, Trey Goins-Phillips, a lot going on. Thanks for bringing us these stories.
Thanks, Heather.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5 Wednesday night at 9:30.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
CBN News presents an election night special with live coverage starting at 7 p.m. Get updates on the campaigns, plus analysis on the shifting balance of power. Watch on the CBN News Channel or on the CBN News app.
The U.S. has faced a multitude of afflictions this year, including a worldwide pandemic, racial riots, violent protests, and a heated presidential race. So another prayer rally was held in Washington, D.C. for Christians to intercede for the nation. The As One rally was a time of prayer and worship in front of the Washington Monument on the National Mall. It's just one of several prayer events held from shore to shore in America, including rallies like The Return and Sean Foyt's Let Us Worship. And that is it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel at any time. Thanks for joining us.